What would you do if the person you just destroyed turned out to be the only person who ever truly loved you? Imagine this. You're standing at the top of the world. Money, power, respect, you've got it all. You walk into a room and people go quiet. You snap your fingers and things happen. You've built an empire from nothing, and you've done it alone. Or so you think. Now imagine walking into a small diner on an ordinary Tuesday morning. You're there to buy the place, tear it down, build something bigger. It's just business. You don't even look at the waitress who pours your coffee. Why would you? She's nobody. But then she says something. Something impossible. Something only one person in the entire world could know. And in that moment, your entire life collapses. This is the story of Ethan Cole, a man who had everything and nothing. A man who spent 25 years running from his past, only to have it find him in the last place he expected. And it's the story of Lena, a woman who never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, never stopped loving the little boy the world told her to forget. This isn't just a story about a diner. It's about what we lose when we survive, and what it costs to remember who we used to be. So grab a seat, pour yourself some coffee, and let me tell you about the day a billionaire walked into a diner and walked out a brother. Let me tell you about power. Real power isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout or threaten. Real power walks into a room and the temperature changes. People straighten their backs. Voices drop. Eyes look down. Ethan Cole had that kind of power. By the time he was 41 years old, Ethan had built an empire that most people only dream about. Commercial real estate, high-rises in Chicago, office complexes in Detroit, luxury condos overlooking Lake Michigan. His company didn't just buy properties, it transformed skylines. His name was on buildings. His signature was on contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He'd done it all himself. No family money, no connections, no safety net, just hunger, just will, just the cold, relentless drive of a man who learned early that the world doesn't give you anything. You take it, or you go without. And Ethan Cole had never gone without. Not since he clawed his way out of the nothing he came from. It was a Tuesday morning in early March when Ethan's Blacktown car pulled up outside a little diner on Riverside Street. The kind of neighborhood place you drive past without noticing. Faded sign, cracked pavement, a few booths by the window, and the smell of bacon grease that had soaked into the walls over decades. Ethan didn't eat at places like this. But he wasn't there to eat. He was there to buy it, tear it down, put up something worth 10 times as much. It was just business. It always was. His assistant had set the meeting for 9 a.m. The property owner, some old man who'd held onto the place longer than he should have, was supposed to meet him here. Neutral ground, the old man had said. Wanted to do it in the diner itself, like that meant something. Ethan didn't care. He'd sign the papers, write the check, and be back in his office by 10:30. He stepped out of the car in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His watch caught the morning light, Swiss, expensive, exact. Everything about Ethan Cole was exact. He pushed open the diner door, and a small bell jingled above his head. Inside, it was quiet. A couple of older men sat at the counter, reading newspapers and nursing coffee. A woman in a corner booth was on her phone. The place smelled like burnt toast and old coffee. The kind of smell that clings. A hostess looked up, a teenager, maybe 17, with a ponytail and nervous eyes. "Just one?" she asked. "I'm meeting someone," Ethan said flatly. "Booth in the back." She nodded quickly and led him to a booth near the kitchen. He didn't say thank you. He just sat down, pulled out his phone, and started scrolling through emails. The world kept moving, even in places like this. A minute later, a waitress approached his table. She moved slowly, carefully. Her belly was round and heavy beneath her apron, 7, maybe 8 months pregnant. Her face looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. But her eyes were soft. Kind even. Her name tag said Lena. "Morning," she said quietly, setting down a menu. "Can I get you some coffee?" Ethan didn't look up. Black. And make it hot. Of course. She turned and walked toward the coffee station. Ethan barely registered her. She was part of the background. Part of the set. In his world, people like her were invisible unless they made a mistake. Lena returned a moment later with a pot of coffee and a white ceramic mug. Her hands shook just slightly as she poured. She set the pot down gently on the table. There you go, she said. Let me know if you need anything else. Ethan picked up the mug and took a sip. His face twisted immediately. This is cold, he said. Lena blinked. I'm sorry. I just pour it fresh. Let me. I said it's cold. His voice was sharp now. Cutting. I don't have time for this. Get me a new pot. A hot one. Do you understand? Her face flushed. Yes. Of course. I'm sorry. She reached for the pot, but her hands were trembling now. The pregnancy, the exhaustion, the sudden sharpness in his tone, it rattled her. She fumbled with the handle and the pot tipped slightly, splashing a few drops of coffee onto the table. Not on him. Not on his suit. Just the table. But Ethan's expression turned ice cold. Are you serious? He said, loud enough that the couple of people in the diner looked over. Do you have any idea who I am? Lena froze. Her breath caught. She looked down at the small spill, then back at him, her face pale. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll clean it up right now. You'll clean it up? Ethan leaned back in the booth, arms crossed, eyes hard. You're barely capable of pouring coffee, and you're going to clean something up? Maybe you should focus on doing one thing right before you try multitasking. The diner had gone completely silent now. Lena's lips trembled. She grabbed a towel from her apron and quickly wiped the table, her face burning with shame. She didn't say anything. She didn't defend herself. She just cleaned the spill and kept her head down. Ethan watched her with the detached irritation of someone swatting at a fly. Get me a manager, he said. I want to speak to whoever's in charge here. That's not necessary, Lena said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll get you fresh coffee. I'll make sure it's perfect. I don't want you getting me anything, Ethan said. I want someone competent. Her hands stilled on the towel. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring down at the table, her shoulders tight, her jaw clenched. And then, slowly, she lifted her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. And something in her expression changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Ethan didn't notice. He was already back on his phone, typing an email, dismissing her from his mind entirely. But Lena didn't move. She stood there at the edge of the booth, staring at him with an intensity that didn't match the moment. Her breathing had changed. Shallow. Quick. Sir, she said softly. He didn't look up. I told you to get a manager. Sir, she said again, a little louder this time. Something in her tone made him glance up, annoyed. What? He snapped. Lena's eyes were wet now. Not with shame. With something much deeper. What's your name? She asked. Ethan blinked. Excuse me? Your name, she repeated, her voice trembling. What is it? He stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Why does that matter? Please, she whispered. Just tell me. There was something in her voice, something raw and desperate, that cut through his irritation just enough to make him answer. Ethan, he said slowly. Ethan Cole. Lena closed her eyes. Her hand went to her mouth, and she let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Ethan's brow furrowed. What the hell is wrong with you? She opened her eyes again, and this time tears were streaming down her face. Ethan, she whispered. Ethan Michael Cole. He went very still. How do you know my middle name? Lena's breath hitched. She gripped the edge of the table like she might fall. Because I gave it to you. The diner seemed to tilt. Ethan's heart started pounding in his chest. His mouth went dry. His mind scrambled for an explanation, a reason, anything that made sense. What are you talking about? He said, his voice low and dangerous now. Lena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Her voice was shaking, but she forced the words out. You used to be afraid of thunderstorms, she said. You'd crawl into my bed in the middle of the night, and I'd tell you stories until you fell asleep. Your favorite was the one about the boy who could talk to stars. Ethan's blood turned to ice. You had a stuffed dog, she continued, her voice breaking. A gray one. You called him Rocket. You took him everywhere. You wouldn't sleep without him. Stop, Ethan whispered. But she didn't stop. And when you scraped your knee on the porch steps, you didn't cry. You never cried. You just looked up at me and said, I'm okay, Lenny. I'm tough. Ethan's chest felt like it was caving in. Nobody called him that. Nobody. Not in 25 years. Lena's voice was barely audible now. You're my little brother, Ethan. The world stopped. Everything, every sound, every movement, every breath just stopped. Ethan stared at her. At this pregnant waitress with tired eyes and trembling hands. At this woman he'd humiliated 5 minutes ago. And all he could see was a 16-year-old girl in a courtroom, screaming as they pulled a little boy away from her. All he could hear was her voice, calling his name as the doors closed. All he could feel was the weight of 25 years of silence. Lena, he whispered. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yeah, Ethan, she whispered back. It's me. And just like that, the man who had everything realized he'd lost the only thing that ever mattered. There are moments in life when time doesn't just stop, it shatters. When everything you thought you knew, everything you built, every wall you put up to protect yourself, it all comes crashing down in a single breath. For Ethan Cole, that moment happened in a diner booth on Riverside Street, staring into the tear-streaked face of a woman he thought he'd lost forever. His sister. His hands were shaking. He didn't realize it at first, but they were trembling against a table like he'd forgotten how to hold himself together. His throat felt tight. His chest ached. And somewhere deep inside him, in a place he'd locked away decades ago, something broke open. Lena, he whispered again, like saying her name might make it real. She nodded, wiping her face with her apron, trying to compose herself even though her whole body was shaking. It's me, she said softly. It's really me. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. What do you say to someone you thought was gone? What do you say when the past you buried comes back to life? He'd spent 25 years convincing himself he didn't need anyone, that he was better off alone, that the people who were supposed to love him had walked away, and he'd survived just fine without them. But now, sitting across from her, all those lies turned to dust. I don't understand. Ethan finally managed, his voice hoarse. How are you here? Lena let out a shaky breath and slowly lowered herself into the booth across from him. Her hands rested on her belly, protective and gentle. She looked exhausted, physically, emotionally, like she'd been carrying a weight for far too long. I never left, Ethan, she said quietly. I never stopped looking for you. His jaw clenched. That's not possible. They told me, he stopped, swallowing hard. They told me you gave me up, that you didn't want me anymore. Lena's face crumpled. No, she whispered, shaking her head.
No, Ethan.
That's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. She took a breath, steadying herself, and then she began to tell him the story he'd never heard. The real story. Do you remember Grandma? She asked softly. Ethan nodded slowly. A little. I remember her kitchen. The smell of cinnamon. Her humming. Lena smiled through her tears. She hummed all the time, even when things were hard. She raised us, Ethan said, the memories coming back in fragments. After Mom left, Lena finished gently. Yeah, Grandma took us in. You were only 3. I was 14. Ethan's eyes were distant now, pulled into a past he'd tried so hard to forget. She was sick, Lena continued, her voice thick. Grandma. She had been for a while, but she never told us how bad it was. She didn't want us to worry. And then one morning, her voice broke. One morning she just didn't wake up. Ethan closed his eyes. I was 16, Lena said. You were 5. And suddenly, we had no one. She paused, wiping her eyes again. I tried, Ethan.
God, I tried so hard.
I went to the courts. I told them I could take care of you. I had a job at the grocery store. I was going to drop out of school if I had to. I didn't care. You were my little brother. You were all I had. Her voice trembled with the weight of old grief. But they said no. Ethan's throat tightened. They said I was too young, too unstable, that I didn't have the means to provide for you. They said you deserved better than a 16-year-old girl who could barely take care of herself. She looked down at her hands. So they took you. The memory hit Ethan like a freight train. The courtroom.
Cold.
Fluorescent lights. People in suits talking about him like he wasn't even there.
And Lena.
Screaming.
Crying.
Reaching for him as a social worker pulled him toward the door. Lenny, he'd cried. Lenny, don't let them take me. I won't, she'd screamed back. I won't, Ethan. I promise. I'll get you back. But the doors had closed. And he'd never seen her again. Until today. I fought for you, Lena said, her voice breaking. I fought for you for 2 years, Ethan. 17 court dates. 17 times I stood in front of a judge and begged them to let me have you back. Ethan stared at her, his vision blurring. I worked 3 jobs, she continued. I got my GED. I rented a tiny apartment. I did everything they asked. I jumped through every hoop. But it was never enough. They kept saying I was too young. That you were better off in the system. A tear slipped down Ethan's cheek. And then one day, Lena whispered, they told me you'd been adopted. Ethan's heart dropped. They said a family wanted you. A good family. Stable. 2 parents.
A house.
Everything I couldn't give you. Her voice cracked. And they said it would be better for you if I stayed away. That it would confuse you. That I'd only make it harder. She looked up at him, her eyes red and raw. So I stopped going to court. But I never stopped looking for you. I kept every document, Lena said, her hands trembling. Every letter I wrote to the state. Every request for information. I searched online. I called agencies. I hired a private investigator when I finally had enough money. When was that? Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. 3 years ago. Ethan blinked. 3 years. She nodded. He found you. Your name. Your company. Everything. She let out a bitter laugh. Turns out my little brother became one of the most powerful men in the state. I saw your picture in a business magazine. And I broke down. Because you'd made it. You'd survived. But I'd lost you. Why didn't you reach out? Ethan whispered. Lena looked away. I tried. I called your office twice. Left messages. But I never heard back. Ethan's stomach twisted. He got hundreds of calls a week. His assistant screened everything. If someone didn't have the right credentials, the right connections, they didn't get through. He'd built walls so high, his own sister couldn't reach him. I thought maybe you didn't want to know me, Lena said quietly. That you'd moved on. That you had a life, and I was just a ghost from a past you didn't want to remember. No, Ethan said, his voice raw. No, Lena. I thought you didn't want me. They stared at each other across the table. 2 people separated by 25 years of lies and loss. I never stopped loving you, Ethan, Lena whispered. Not for one single day. And that was when Ethan broke. The man who never cried, who prided himself on control, on strength, on never showing weakness, put his face in his hands and sobbed. Great, shaking sobs that came from somewhere so deep he didn't know it existed. Lena reached across the table and took his hands in hers. And for the first time in 25 years, Ethan Cole wasn't alone. They sat there for a long time. The diner around them had gone back to its quiet hum, but in that booth, the world had changed forever. Eventually, Ethan lifted his head. His eyes were red, his face wet, but something in him had softened. Something had come back to life. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick. For what I said earlier. For how I treated you. I didn't know. You couldn't have known, Lena said gently. But I should have, Ethan insisted. I should have been better. I should have seen you. Lena smiled sadly. You spent 25 years believing you were abandoned, Ethan. That does something to a person. I don't blame you for building walls. Ethan looked down at her belly. When are you due? 6 weeks, she said, her hand resting protectively over the baby. It's a girl. His breath caught. A girl. She nodded. I'm doing this alone. The father, he's not in the picture. But I'm okay with that. I've been alone before. Her voice wavered. I'll be okay. Ethan's jaw tightened. No, he said firmly. Lena blinked.
What?
You're not doing this alone. His voice was steady now, certain. Not anymore. Tears filled her eyes again. Ethan. I mean it. He leaned forward. I lost 25 years with you. I'm not losing any more. And that baby. His voice softened. She's my niece.
She's family.
And she's never going to wonder if someone loves her. She's never going to feel abandoned. Not while I'm alive. Lena covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. I'm here now, Lena, he said. And I'm not going anywhere. That afternoon, Ethan canceled every meeting on his calendar. He called the property owner and told him the deal was off. The diner wasn't being torn down. In fact, Ethan was buying it, not to destroy it, but to save it. He hired contractors that same week. New floors. New equipment. A fully paid maternity leave for Lena, with benefits. He set up a trust fund for her daughter. He found her a new apartment, safe and spacious, closer to good schools. But more than that, he showed up. He came to her ultrasound appointments. He helped her paint the nursery. He sat with her on her couch and listened to her talk about Grandma, about the years they'd lost, about the life she'd built in his absence. And slowly, piece by piece, they rebuilt what had been broken. 6 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Lena gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Ethan was in the delivery room. He held Lena's hand through every contraction. And when the baby finally arrived, screaming and perfect, the nurse placed her in Lena's arms. She's beautiful, Lena whispered, tears streaming down her face. Ethan stood beside her, staring down at the tiny, wrinkled face of his niece. What are you going to name her? He asked softly. Lena looked up at him, her eyes full of love.
Hope, she said.
Her name is Hope. Ethan smiled, a real smile, the kind he hadn't felt in years. That's perfect. Lena reached out and took his hand. Thank you, she whispered, for coming back. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion, for never letting me go. 3 months later, the diner reopened. It had a new sign now, Lena's Place, and it was better than ever.
Bright, clean, warm.
But it still smelled like coffee and bacon. It still had booths by the window. It still felt like home. Ethan came by every Sunday morning. Sometimes he brought pastries. Sometimes he just brought himself. And every time, Lena would pour him a cup of coffee, hot, black, perfect, and sit across from him with baby Hope in her arms. They'd talk about everything. About Grandma. About the years they lost. About the life they were building now. And sometimes, they'd just sit in silence. The comfortable kind. The kind only family understands. Because in the end, that's what they were. Not a billionaire and a waitress. Not strangers in a diner. Just a brother and a sister. Together again. Finally home.